Hello, I'm Johnny from Dicebreaker, and I adore pen and paper role-playing games. I've been playing them for the best part of a decade on both sides of the GM screen, and not to put too fine a point on it, they're one of my favourite things in the entire world. The chances are, if you're watching this video, you're interested in trying them out for yourself. Or maybe you're a seasoned veteran trying to work out how to get more of your friends involved. Or hey, maybe you've seen me GMing for Outside Xbox and Outside Extra in their D&D series The Oxventure, from which this footage is taken. Whoever you are and whatever your reasons for watching, I'm here to help. This is How to Pen and Paper, a series aimed at demystifying pen and paper role-playing games and getting you started. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of choosing a game or making an interesting villain or getting over stage fright as a new player, what is a pen and paper role-playing game? How does it work? And why is it fun? A pen and paper role-playing game is basically a collaborative storytelling exercise that takes place between a group of players. Typically speaking, each player will control one character. They'll have created that character according to the rules of the game, choosing their background, their abilities, their motivations, and so on and so forth. That player decides how their character acts and thinks, what they say and what they do as they go about their adventures. In other words, a character is a player's main way of interacting with the game world because, well, they're part of that world themselves, with a history and a disposition and their own goals and ambitions. In short then, each player has a unique character at their disposal, and they can use that character to try and do anything. All very promising, I hope you'll agree, but how does that work mechanically? Well, players navigate the story and steer their characters through the action by narrating what happens. Let's say, for example, you and I are playing a game together and our characters are travelling at night through a wood in a carriage being drawn by two horses, when suddenly a highwayman blocks our path and says, "Stand and deliver." It's up to us to say what our characters do, so I might say I start rooting around in my pocket so I could find my purse, and then I start handing my valuables over to the highwayman. Now that doesn't take very much skill, and I don't think he's going to try and stop me in this instance because, well, I'm doing what he wants. Now you might say something like, while the highwayman is distracted, I want to sneak out the door on the other side of the carriage, sneak around the back, and get behind him. It's a bold plan, but it's a risky one. Success in this instance is not guaranteed, and that's where the dice and the final member of our game group both come in. In a pen and paper role-playing game, one person in particular is a bit different. This person is the DM or GM, the Dungeon Master or Games Master. Sometimes they're called the referee or the marshal, sometimes they're the keeper, the master of ceremonies, the storyteller, even the hollyhock god, but whatever their name, it's roughly the same job. This person acts as a guiding hand throughout the adventure. They describe the environments the characters find themselves in, they take on the roles of any other people they happen to meet in the game world, and most crucially, they're in charge of enforcing the rules of the game and deciding when players get to do something automatically and when they need to reach for some dice. Now let's go back to our example of the highwayman and the carriage. The GM has already described how you were going along in the carriage and then it ground to a halt and a gruff highwayman stuck his face and a pistol through the window and said, "Stand and deliver your money or your life." And I said I was going to hand over my valuables, which again is what the highwayman wants to happen, and it doesn't exactly take that much skill to pick up a purse and hand it to somebody, so the GM just lets that happen. Now when you share your plan of sneaking undetected out of the carriage and all the way back round the highwayman, they might say something like, "Okay, you can try that, but it's gonna be a bit risky. He might notice you, especially since he's on edge. I want you to roll stealth." At this point, you pick up some dice, you have a look at your character sheet to see how good they are at actually being stealthy, and depending on the specific rules of the game you're playing, you try to reach a certain target number with your roll. If you hit that target number, your sneak attempt is successful. The GM might say something like, "The carriage moves a little as you transfer your weight onto the ground, but the highwayman doesn't seem to notice. You sneak around and you're now behind him. What do you want to do next?" If you don't meet the target number, however, you've failed the roll, or more importantly, your character has failed in their attempt. So the GM might say something like, "The creaking of the carriage as you transfer your weight onto the road alerts the highwayman to your presence. He presses the gun against Johnny's cowardly character's head and says, 'You move, and I'll shoot him. Now what do you want to do?'" And so the game carries on either way, but hopefully you can now see how important the dice are in deciding how key moments play out. And that's the thing that makes tabletop role-playing games actual games, rather than just people sitting around and telling a story where they get to decide exactly what happens all of the time. So while the players try and navigate these adventures and these challenges to the best of their ability, or rather their characters' abilities, the GM's role is not just to craft a whole world around them, but to make sure they're tested by that world, that their successes are earned, and that their failures are appropriately dramatic and/or hilarious. And that's the core concept of how tabletop role-playing works. The rest, to be honest, is just detail. How long each adventure lasts is really up to everybody around the table. Everything might be wrapped up in a single session that takes a couple of hours, or it might be a long and winding campaign that takes multiple sessions to complete. It's up to you, really. And that freedom to choose, in my opinion, is why pen and paper games are just so good. The choice you have in what game you're playing, who your character is, what they say and do, how intense the action is, how long it runs for, pretty much every aspect you can think of, it makes role-playing a really involved and a really personal hobby. When you get around the table, you're not just exploring an imaginary world, you're shaping it around you. You're having adventures and you're making memories all of your own. And if that sounds inviting, good. I hope it does. And now you're hopefully interested in sitting down and playing a pen and paper game for yourself, the odds are you've got a bunch of questions on your mind, like, how do I pick a game? How do I make an interesting character that's fun to play? How do I write an adventure? And what do I do if it all goes a bit sideways? We'll be covering these questions and a whole lot more in future videos on Dicebreaker, so keep an eye out and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a thing. If you have any particular questions you'd like to see answered, feel free to fire them into the comments below. And if you have any stories of your own or words of encouragement for those thinking about trying pen and paper role-playing games for the first time, why not share them? I'm sure they'd be very much appreciated. Now hopefully you enjoyed this video, and if you did, there are plenty more from Dicebreaker for you to watch. Some of them should be on screen now, so do give one of those a click. Do like, subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss anything else from us, but most importantly, thank you very much for watching and have a lovely day.